Welcome to the Boogeyman Podcast with Darrin Person, episode number 2. Today, Darrin will discuss overcoming fears to starting a new relationship with Heather Eder.
Bye bye, Boogeyman.
Welcome to episode number 2 with the Boogeyman Podcast. Today is just a great day for us. We get an opportunity not only just talk more about the Boogeyman book that I wrote, but to be able to talk about a subject that's not only sensitive, but that is very important as we talk about relationships. But before I go on, I'm really excited about my special guest that will be here with us today. Her name is Heather Eder. She is an author, an editor, a coach. Heather, a mom, right? A wife. She's a founder of Oak Ministries as well. And so, Heather, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
Doing good. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to be on the Boogeyman Podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I know we talked previously. For those that are not aware, in just writing the Boogeyman book, Heather played an instrumental role. She was an editor. I know she probably know more about that book than I do. How many times she's probably read it. But in this episode, Heather, I could not wait to be able to kind of dive in. As within the podcast, we'll be talking about all types of fears. And one of the fears that I've come across with, if through counseling or just through talks with individuals, is fear of starting a new relationship. I know I've been, very blessed. Just a few days ago, I celebrated 25 years of marriage with Miss Iris. You guys will see her pretty soon on the show, and it's been just a really a life journey. I met her when I was 18. She was 15. I'm not going to say the age altogether, but she was a little bit younger than I was. And God really blessed us all these years to be able to have a really beautiful relationship. However, Heather, what I've learned along the way, it hasn't been the same for everyone. And some people really desire to enter in a new relationship. And really what came to me was I had a conversation with a lady, and we were talking about relationships, and she said, I'm not worried about ever being in a new relationship, ever getting married. It's just going to be me and Jesus. That's all I need is Jesus. But within the moment of that conversation, I looked in her eyes, and I noticed that she still desired a relationship. Even though she said that, she still wanted to. And whether it's been divorce or unfaithfulness or domestic violence, unfortunately, or just falling out of love, she was very afraid. So I want to talk about that, Heather. I want to be able to talk about that during this episode. So, let's get started. But I want to ask you just one question to get us going. Why do you think individuals are afraid to start new relationships?
I think I love that question. I was kind of pondering that over and over yesterday, and just thinking about how, not only do we sometimes carry into relationships a fear of what we've experienced, whether it's parents or, friends watching other people walk through things. But I think that there's something, relationships are so sacred because God created us for relationship. And so, I think there's a vulnerability, like if I'm in a relationship with somebody, they're going to see all my flaws. Not only do I have to worry about somebody else's flaws or their brokenness, but now, I'm coupled with somebody else's. And, I think sometimes the dynamic of different personalities can actually bring out more flaws, and so I think that there's a real underlying really fear, like, you talk about quite a bit. I mean, we really just do carry that concern that we're going to be seen, or that we're not going to be seen, that we're going to be valued, or that we're going to be dismissed. And I think there's a lot wrapped up in that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And when we talk about that, we talk about people that desire, maybe to live like a single life, right? Mm-hmm. And, before I really walk into that, because I know there's some that say, I just desire to be alone. And I mean, that's okay, right? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But there are others that desire to really get right back into a relationship, or if it's been divorced, get right back into a marriage.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about like your own journey of that and overcoming maybe those fears, and so we can know where you come from?
Yeah. Yeah. So, growing up, I love my dad, but he just really kind of battled with being committed to my mom. And there were kind of varying degrees of what I saw as a child as being betrayal, whether it was, pornography or, flirting with other women. Like I just noticed these things growing up. And my desire was always to be a really good wife. I always wanted to be a wife and a mom. And my dad would talk a lot kind of negatively about my mom and the way that she didn't play her role properly. And so, when I got married the first time, my heart was I was going to be the best wife. I was going to be, the best cook, and I was going to be kind, and I was going to be patient. And if I was good enough, I was going to be loved well enough. And that relationship ended because of infidelity. And honestly, even, when everything kind of blew up, I even, I was like, I don't get divorced. I'm a good, I was a Catholic at the time. So I was a good Catholic girl, we don't get divorced. And it was a really big challenge because I felt like I had failed, even though it wasn't my failure. I still took on a lot of that. Well, obviously I wasn't good enough. I wasn't enough. I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't successful enough. And so it really, it kind of took me back to that place of insecurity and being seen and being valued. And so then when I had actually dated my husband, now we dated in college, and we bumped into each other. And I think I was still really seeking validation. I'll say that, because we'd known each other from before, we kind of rushed into it a little bit. And I was real sprung. He's always kind of been my guy. I mean, I just always kind of thought back, even, when I was married the first time, like, what if, so he's always kind of been my heart. But we did kind of rush into that too. And so then we actually ended up with some of the same problems, and we've overcome them, which I know we'll be talking about, but that, we also ended up with, a three's a crowd situation a couple of times. And that became, a point of, I think, reflection for me. And when I realized I had to really do the work, like, how do I keep getting into this space? And what does God want to show me in it? And in our situation, I chose to stay and work on that. And I'd say it's been a journey of overcoming fears ever since. So,
Well, first of all, just thank you for sharing that. And I know me and you've had some conversations before, and so it's this notion, like, right, when you see this happening again, and I know you talk about that. Is there times that you look at yourself, or do you look at the other person? Tell me a little bit more about, that process, because, oftentimes individuals, when they get back in relationships, maybe the atmosphere seems similar or the individual seem similar. And I think that can take us down like a dark road, thinking it's going to happen again. This relationship is going to fail again.
mm-hmm.
When you encountered that, what were some of the steps that you begin to take to make sure that, I guess, you were healed enough to endure?
It's interesting because, when I married my first husband, I tried really hard to make sure he was as far from my dad as possible. Like, they couldn't have been anything. They were so far removed from similar. And we've both done our sociology and our psych classes, right? Like, I understand that from a psychological standpoint that we do tend to gravitate towards, people that are similar to our opposite gender parent. Like, that's kind of, what I learned as I went along. But I think that for me, recognizing that from a spiritual aspect too, I think there are things that need to be worked out. I think that God wants to heal us. And I wouldn't say that he put me in that situation. I mean, I still chose it, but I think that God uses that draw. I think that there's just something inside us that, whether it's a generational curse or whether it's something that we have to work out in ourselves, for me to come to a place where I recognize that I have value, despite, because growing up, I thought if I was good enough, these things weren't going to happen. And, when I came to my marriage that I'm in now, and I found myself with everything falling apart again, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. What part am I playing in this? Like, really, what part am I playing in this? What pieces do I need to learn? Where do I need to shore things up? Where do I need to trust God? What do I need to give up? Because I just think that there's just something really powerful in taking full ownership. And again, I would never say that this is anybody else's fault, but clearly I'm drawn to, maybe I'm drawn to fixing that person. I know I have a strong desire to love the broken, but really like taking that before God. And I've spent so much time praying about, what part can I play in it? Even if it's just being willing to look at blind spots, and to, look for those warning signs. But also just to remember that we're in this journey. I remember there was this time when I was just praying every single day for my marriage. And every time that I prayed, I just really felt the Lord speak to me. And he said, wait, every time. And I was like, what? I don't know what that means. I want out. I was like, I can't do this anymore. It hurts so bad. And I really battled. I did. I struggled with suicidal thoughts. I struggled with depression. And he kept saying, just wait. And it was so, every time he would say it, it was just so quiet and peaceful. And I've come to this space now, we're 7 years into we've been married 20 years in September. The first 13 years were so hard, but now like there are these beautiful transformations that are happening for both of us. And I just really feel like a lot of the opportunity that we both had to grow is the fact that we really have given it to God. And it's not about blaming. I've had people ask me, well, what if it happens again? I'm like, well, you can be married 30 years and all of a sudden it happens. That you can't predict and you can't prevent. And I think that as humans, we do tend to try to control those things, but all we can control is ourselves and how we grow and what we learn in those situations. So,
yeah. So how do we, you brought up something that really interested me in several areas. Number one, you talked about like being honest with yourself. I talk about this a lot of places, like, right when issues happen, sometimes maybe we might point the finger, but there is like a blend, right? There's a balance. Like, what's the balance with you being honest and looking within yourself? And I agree that I think it starts there. Like, what can I do? How can I prepare myself for this relationship? Or how can I prepare myself while I'm in the relationship? But then there's this other balance of like, what responsibility do that person play in there? And when you're walking down that road, Heather, how was that? How much, I don't know if there's a perfect percentage. How much was it that you're looking at yourself and what you need to do and then looking at the other person? And how could you let that other person also know that, hey, there's some responsibility in this from you? Is there a blend? Is it 50-50? How was it for you, like walking down that road?
Yeah, it probably changes every day, but the one thing that I really, really learned, because again, I would never tell anyone, it's your fault, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that I did not value myself. I did not have expectations, and then I would say, well, how can I control somebody else's actions? But there was a part of me, and I think this is the part that people kind of miss. Like, it doesn't matter what you say, we can all talk a big game, but if the other person, if their spirit can recognize that you're willing to put up with behavior, or that you don't truly value yourself, that you don't have healthy boundaries, I think that it creates a dichotomy for somebody else. So I feel like the more I was like, look, A, I respect myself enough to not be okay with this, but B, I respect and expect enough of you that this is not the behavior that's best for you. I want you to be successful too. Is this really how you want to live your life? And I think that there were some pretty hard conversations. I threw some big words around like narcissism, and I was like, look, like, this is unacceptable. This is not okay. Are we still building this together? And I think that there's a lot of ebb and flow in that. And even with my first marriage, we went through counseling, and I allowed the opportunity for behavior to change, but there has to be an expectation. I think sometimes we either don't forgive at all, or we forgive way too fast. And then we don't pray about and get good counsel on what the healthy boundaries and what the expectations look like. Because at the end of the day, you still have work to do to rebuild our relationship and to create a space where we can feel like we can work together again as a team. I think too that one of the most important pieces of marriage, especially since that's really what we're focusing on, but all relationships in the body of Christ, is that the Lord puts us together for a variety of reasons, and he operates through those. So, like you and I have always had a great working relationship. We have a very good rapport. We bring out ideas in each other. That's the nature of our conversations. When you're in an intimate relationship, that looks different because he's going to bring out my strengths or my weaknesses. Okay, well, what would you like to see today? Because your behavior will directly affect what part of me you get, and I think that, again, it's not anybody's, it's not his fault if I'm out of line, and it's not my fault when he is, but we also work together in unity because that's the way God created us. And so we have the ability to help bring out the best in one another if we choose to. And I think that that's one thing that we did talk a lot about is the shame and the things that he was working through is starting to kind of come out in him now. His gratitude for where we are is coming out now, 7 years after our turning point. And but long before that, I kept telling him verbally, not just in prayer, but I believe in you. This is what I believe we're capable of. This is how I want to serve you. This is how I want to be served. And so I think being really clear with expectations makes a big difference too. And that starts with getting, being in prayer. What does the Lord say about relationships and what that looks like, and honor and respect and preferring one another, and then getting good counsel. Because boundaries are going to look different for everybody, but if they're rooted in biblical truth, I think that's pretty foundational.
I think what's important, as I hear you talk about, there was a process, to healing, right? It seems like there's been a process to you entering a new relationship. And when I mean process, I mean, obviously God played a major role. You talked about counseling, and I think there's some intentionality to that. But sometimes some of it happens like right when you're in the relationship. So when I hear you mention that, especially for those that might be listening or might be struggling with that there has to be like some steps that you take, whether it's healing within that relationship or starting a new relationship. Oftentimes I hear people that, you meet somebody and you're like, it's interesting. We meet them, love at first sight, or that person is for me, right? And they jump into another relationship. And not to judge anyone, because I mean there's some instances where people meet somebody and within a month and it happens. But if you're really going to have a healthy relationship or a good start, I think you really got to be intentional on how you're doing it and some steps that you took. And I love some of the words that you used that really resonated with me when you talk about expectations and, values. And so it tells me it's like, it's a lot to do with us, like when we come into a relationship. And I mean, we can, obviously there's individuals that need to be healthy, that need counseling. But if we come in with expectations and values, and I say this all the time with, being married to Iris, I feel her expectations. I feel her values that she has for herself. And to be honest with you, it makes me react in a certain way. I understand there's, things that she values, and I want to make sure that, I meet not only those expectations, but that I also respect those values. And I think we, maybe we all tend to want that, right, Heather? Yeah. We all want a healthy relationship. We want to. I think we're made in a way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny because you mentioned Iris, because of course we've never met in person, but we've met, virtually. And I think what's funny is, how you meet those people and you're like, oh, I will treat her like a queen. Like but right? Like, that. And I think, you can't fake that. I think a lot of people really try to put on this big front, but that's genuine from her. She's not pretending, right? And that's internal work that she has done. That is, whatever, we all need to heal, right? So whatever healing or process that we've gone through and whatever God has done inside, I think that as Christians, especially, this idea of faking it till you make it applies across the board. We come to church, we clean up, we look really nice, we try not to swear, and then we go home and do whatever we're going to do. If you're not, like you said, intentionality, right? If we're not intentional about being genuine in becoming a whole person, that's going to come into conflict when you're in a relationship with other people, because you can only pretend for so long. And, like I said earlier, my expectations grew as I grew. As a child, I didn't expect to be respected. I wanted to be, but I didn't expect it. Going through the processes I've gone through, I can't live the other way. And so I had to do the work to recognize my value. Like it all has to start in here and what God wants to do in you first. I just think it's so important to be a whole person. Like you said, you can marry somebody at 20, you can be 40, but if you're not a whole person inside and that other person isn't whole, not perfect, but a whole, the two wholes work together.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Kind of.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've heard that, I know many people talked about, when you get married, you need to be two wholes, right? And I was like, what do you mean? Because sometimes we come together and did not really understand that. So I even like, our conversation now, because we're talking about being together, but at the same time, we're talking about what we can do as individuals. And certain times, I think we forget that, like when we get ready to get in a relationship, maybe I will be healed. If I will be happy, I will be restored. Like somehow marriage or relationship is going to bring that to us. And I've heard people like preach all the time, and I like, that sounds good, but I guess it's really true that in terms of happiness, we come in being happy. We come in being, and I understand, like my opening, I was going to talk about even my own. I have been a better person by being, married. It has enhanced who I was, and there's even been some healing in that. But you talked about like steps, because I know some wonder like, hey, I started a relationship and there's a lot of stuff going on. I took the step. I was afraid to do it, but I hear Darrin and Heather talk today, and I'm still like I'm not healed. What steps would you say, Heather, if you were talking to, ladies that are out there, or, or individuals or husbands, what steps do you need to take to be like whole or be complete? What would you suggest?
I think everybody's journey is different, but I am a woman of faith. So, I think that there's a lot to be said for prayer and getting godly counsel. One thing when I am coaching my clients, we talk a lot about false versus real fears. And so, whether it's insecurity, anger is rooted in fear. There are a lot of things. And so I have them make lists of, things that they're concerned about, whether, they're not enough or whatever. And I try to have them write down, okay, is that real or is that false? Maybe I'm afraid, I'm going to die on the airplane. Okay, is that real or is that false? It's actually false because you don't know it to be true yet. And I think being able to start practicing identifying what is true, what is not, what is biblical, what is not, getting that help for that healing. Maybe if you've been a victim of domestic violence, is it my fault? Like starting to like look for truth versus falsehood, because I think that in today's society, it's really hard to figure that out. And that really does include time in prayer and time in the word. But I also think just being I think that we need to be willing to hear the no. I think that the one thing, I was speaking recently with someone really close to me, and they were talking about their relationship and they were saying, well, I've been praying about it and God hasn't said no yet. And I was like, is your heart ready for the no? Like, are you literally saying, God, if this is not the one, close the door? Like, I think that there are lines that we have to draw in the sand. There are boundaries. Like, if your man's texting and he's not going to be honest with you about who it is, that's shady. It's time to move on. Like, there are those little things that we justify, and there are things that we quantify. And I think as Christians, we want to be nice, we want to be kind, we want to be forgiving, and you can be all those things and still let them go. I think it's really important to know that, if it's not God, like when you go through the scriptures, right, and they talk about, the man's job, like to love, not to pick on the guys, but right, they're supposed to love their wife as Christ loved the church. Okay, if he's not loving you like that right now, he's not going to love you like that when you're married. I think just being really real and not trying to dance around things and allow those little nuances, because those little nuances are indications of something really big.
Wait 1 second though. I wasn't expecting the word shady to come out. I know you knew about that word shady. All right. So when you talk about being shady, right? What are some red flags, you're right, we should look at for that you would tell couples like to, and you said something that's very good because you like the expectation, if I see like red flags, whatever they might be early in a relationship, I don't know how they magically disappear, right? Without some of the counseling, without prayer.
Right.
However, we all see them, right? I had this one of my first preachers, pastors that ever, he told me, he said, hey, what's in the house is going to peep out the window eventually. And I never understood what he said. He said, no. And when you see them peep out, trust that's who you saw.
Yes.
Because if it's in there, it's going to show up. But what I think we tend to do is we tend to say, oh, okay, maybe it's not going to be that bad. Maybe over time it's going to get better. Maybe he might stop, calling me names, or she might stop, hiding in the corner doing this. So what would you say are like red flags that we should look out for and, prior to starting a new relationship or being in one?
Yeah. I love what you said about that peeping out the window. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, the thing is my first thing that I always tell my children is when people show you who they are, believe them. If you don't, I mean, just believe them. So if that behavior is not okay, whatever that looks like, then being willing to say that doesn't work for me. But I think transparency is the biggest thing for me. I mean, at least especially with the topic and the places that I've gone, like, aside from honor, obviously, someone who is violent or name calling, that is off the table completely because that does not align with the word of God whatsoever. But, my kids and I joke because my daughters picked up a little bit of this too. My husband used to talk about like the guilt of a lie of omission. Well, like half truths. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't work for me. Like, and why I am being honest. I didn't lie. I told you this, right? Transparency is what I think is the most important thing when it comes to honesty and integrity. I'm going to be transparent with you. I'm not going to dance around or give you half truths or, I always think it's interesting when men, especially, I know women do this too, but they want to, a lot of times they do want to feel like they're very autonomous, right? They want to be, I'm grown. I can go wherever I want. I can do whatever I want. Well, that's great. But when you're in a relationship, now you're two. So if you're still thinking about what you want and how you want to operate, that's not thinking about me as your other half. We're a team. And I think that's, and especially in a marriage situation, I think it's just so important to just have an anticipation of transparency. Like if you have to lie about where you're going, then that's a problem. And even if you're not doing anything, you're creating a culture of distrust. And so I think and I get it. I mean, I do see that in people wanting to feel like they're not beholden to someone, but if you're part of a team, it's just a shift in perspective, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I think too, you're talking about red flags, and I think it's really hard to pinpoint those because there are so many. But I think the Holy Spirit's always really, he's very faithful to tell you, you just don't want to listen. I think, and that goes back to what I said before, like you have to be willing to hear the no. You have to be willing to accept people for who they are and recognize if that makes you uncomfortable, that's not it. My daughter, my second daughter is in college, and she and her ex-boyfriend now, something had come up that he was dealing with, and she had called me and she's like, Mommy, what do you think about this? And I said, well, I know what I think about it. And I said, but the question is, what do you think about it? Mm-hmm. So if this is something that he feels is acceptable, and that's how he wants to live his life, and that there's nothing wrong with that, you cannot be in a relationship expecting to change him. That's not fair to him. This is who he is. And you are who you are. So if it's bothering you enough to ask me what I think about it, is this something you're willing to live with for the rest of your life? Because if you guys move into marriage, you can't anticipate that's just going to magically disappear, or that it's not going to appear sometime later, like you said, peeping out the window, right? And they ended up breaking things off, and I said, but it's up to you. Like you have to decide what your expectations are, but you also cannot think, women like to think that we're going to change our men. We're going to fix them. We're going to mold them and fix them. You have to be willing to let men be who they are, and allow God to do the process, and then let God warn you and tell you no if it's not meant for you. Because again, you and Iris are obviously this amazing match. And I've watched you guys ebb and flow. And there's a reason, there's a strategy behind your relationship. And there are people who they could love each other very much, but they're not necessarily meant to be together. They're not equally yoked. They're not going in the same direction. It doesn't mean that God doesn't love one or the other. It doesn't mean that one isn't valued and the other one is. It just means that you're not designed to do that journey together. And I think that it's just really important. If it's not aligning properly, if something in your spirit is telling you no, or you don't like it, you don't spend the next 20 years trying to browbeat the other person into changing. You just move on to the thing that works for you. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, because what could be the blessings that come with a relationship if it's not done right, and if you're not in a good, healthy relationship, those same blessings can almost feel like cursing, right?
Yeah.
It feels like, I talk about it all the time, that, relationships can either lift you or like take you down. And they're so important. And, oftentimes I see people that's been in relationships for long moments of time and feel so unhappy. So making that decision, I know I talk about like overcoming fear. And when I hear you talk, I'm reminded of that. But it's so more important to make sure we're ready to enter. You can be like, I'm ready to go. I'm overcoming my fear. But as you do that, maybe there's also maybe some, overcoming fear in terms of being prepared. It's okay to, like, to your point, like if you hear a no, don't do it, because the road that you're going to walk down, right, it's going to be a long road. And, and it's sometimes that's really hard to overcome. But there's also blessings, right? And when I hear you talk about, your relationship, even now with your husband, as people listen in, I don't think I have to sell or promote marriage or relationships, because there is so much that comes from it, right? So when you think about where you're at now, what's the like blessings that come out of being married and overcoming all that you overcame, right? Some people didn't last through even the things that you talk about, Heather, and some people would have said, "Oh, I'm done." But are there blessings on the other side of that, Heather? And could you talk about that?
Yeah. It's funny. This is the first time I've talked about this publicly, and I did get my husband's permission, because it's a sensitive thing, and I don't ever want to dishonor him. But we want other people to know that they can go through that, if it's God's will, right? And it's funny, because when we first kind of started turning, there was this interesting shift inside of me. It makes me super emotional. But I think that there's something very interesting about seeing somebody else's darkness and still loving them. Obviously, from a safe space, right? But being able to really love who God has made them to be, like their soul, not just the personality or the things they do for you. I just had this deep, deep, deep love for my man. Like it's and we've overcome this thing. It's like we kind of conquered this mountain, and it took a long time. And I'll be honest, we didn't probably do it the best way. We didn't attack it head on. And so now some of the conversations kind of come and go now, and we kind of like reflect back a little bit instead of really tackling it, which I know a lot of people would say was the better option. So don't go my route. That may not be the best for you. But I think too that we appreciate each other more. I think those little things that drive my friends nuts, and I'm like, you cannot be complaining about that. You have no idea what's important. It's like earlier when you prayed, we have breath in our lungs. Thank you, God, for every day. We don't take it for granted. I do not take my marriage for granted. I do not take our family for granted. I'm so grateful that we are breaking the generational curse. We are. I mean, my parents got divorced, his parents, who isn't divorced? I just feel like the whole world is. And we're like, no, we are not going to do this. We're going to figure out how to do this for our kids. We're going to show them that it can be done. And, I would never wish my journey on somebody else's marriage, but I almost feel like, I don't know, I appreciate it so much more. And I feel like, he appreciates me so much more. I think that at this point in our lives, we're both, okay, he's 49. He would like to tell you I'm 50. He's got another 3 weeks.
All right.
We're moving into that phase of life where a lot of marriages, this is where the midlife crisis often happens. This is where people kind of spin out because their kids are grown. Well, we still have 2 at home, and we started a little bit later, but we also have walked through so much that, we just talk about how content we are, just kind of really appreciating one another. And I also know that when we do go through those seasons, you'll start to kind of nitpick a little bit, or you want to view as cranky. And then, you can go through like 3 or 4 days or a couple of weeks where you're just kind of getting on each other's nerves, like recognizing how fast that can spin out. Or even a couple of weeks ago, he hadn't been fully transparent about something. And I would have spun out before. And I waited about 3 days and I prayed about it. And finally, I just went to him and I said, hey, I have a question. Like, can you just help me with this? And he instantly, like, he used to get so defensive, and he's put his hand on my knee and he's like, you are so right. I am so sorry. That was a stupid thing not to tell you. And I can see that now it's created this thing that didn't have to be. And so we both seeing like the detriment and what we had done to each other before. I prayed about it first. I didn't fly off the handle. I didn't allow my emotions to dictate my decision-making in the way that I chose to speak to my husband. I still came to him out of honor and without accusation. And he had also learned, you know what, if I continue to lie on this thing that makes no difference whatsoever, it's going to send us back to this place. Like, we know how dark it gets and we don't want to go back. And so I think there's a benefit to that too.
Well, I just thank you so much for your transparency. I've said that many places, or even in my writings, is, that transparency is just liberating. And I thank you and your husband allowing you to be able to, really talk about this, because I think there's a lot of people that will listen in that need that. And, oftentimes we hide, right? And if we want to really help others, I think a little bit, Heather, I think people are tired of like people like just talking about it or making it seem like everything is bliss. But when we look behind the scenes and you look in our homes and you look in different situations, if we can just be honest, there's so many other people that we can help because they're experiencing the same things that we're experiencing. That's if you ever sit down and talk to like women or men or couples, if you don't look real close, you're like, oh, is that me? Is that the same? Because we're more alike than we are different. Yeah. And I'm glad we're talking about, this fear. People ask me all the time, why did you write this book on Boogeyman? Because I said I had fears and I didn't like them. I don't like how having fear restricted me, that squashed my dreams, that made me be, soft in some areas where I should have just went after it. I didn't like how it prevented different blessings coming in my life because I was afraid to like launch out. So when we talk about relationships today, I think so I'm glad you mentioned about the blessings that's on the other side, because I think, on the other side of overcoming our fears is victory. Is a better life, is abundant living, and then whatever relationship that's out there for you, it could be such a blessing. But like we talked about today, there has to be some preparation. There has to be some healing. Right. And even when you get there, because oftentimes I'm so glad that, before we even really talked about this, I didn't know your journey. Right. I know you re-entered a new relationship, but when you got there, there's still some things that you overcome, because I think in our minds, we think, oh, I moved out of that relationship, bad relationship. Therefore, I'm going to move into something that's just bliss, and that I won't have any more problems anymore. That's not the truth. Nope. People talk about the grass is not greener on the other side. I understand that. But even, and it starts by us looking at ourselves, preparing ourselves, having values and expectations. And I know there's some individuals out there, Heather, that would like to re-enter a relationship. And we're not promising them that it's going to be bliss, but but I think there's obviously some benefits, and God will use those relationships to bless your life. What would you tell people that are afraid, that want to start a new relationship, that encountered some issues, but they desire to be married again or start a new relationship? What would you tell them?
Well, first, I would say, make sure that you have prayed about that, and that you are aligned with your first love first. I think that, we often look to other people to fulfill us or to fix us. I know that when Chris and I first got together, well, the second time, I really felt like, he was going to heal. He was going to heal what had been broken. He was going to restore that, and he was my redemption. For what I walked through the first time. And I kind of looked to him to fix things that only God could fix. And so I think that it's really important to have your expectations set correctly. It's not my job to fulfill Chris. It's not his job to fulfill me. And yet when we honor one another, it is fulfilling. But when you hang your hat on somebody else for your happiness instead of the Lord or who you've designed to be, you're setting everybody up for failure. So I think, being honest with where you've been, really taking inventory. Okay, where have I been? What part was mine? In those past failed relationships. What am I looking for in a relationship? Am I looking for somebody that's just gonna make me feel good, or are we building something together? What do I want in a marriage? I think that some people just want a provider, and some people just want a housemaid. And you have to be honest with yourself what you're actually looking for, because that also helps you to set up, who do I need to be, who do I need to look for in order to make that work, and what is God's plan for me? Like you mentioned, some people, there is something appealing about being single, and there's something beautiful in that as well, and letting Christ be, your life partner. But I think honesty and transparency with yourself first is super important, and really addressing those fears. If you feel like you're not enough, well, why is that? And let's work through that. And again, even if you don't go to counseling, let's say, a counselor, a coach, a pastor, a friend, but somebody that's willing to help you kind of hold up a mirror in front of yourself and say, okay, like you have to be real with yourself first. I think, especially if you've been broken or if you've been wounded before, and are you really ready to count on somebody else, in that realm? I think too that I had a thought, and it's like hanging out right here, and I can't quite grasp it, but just thinking about the way that Chris has helped, those tensions in relationships help us to grow and to shore us up. And I think that when you also take inventory of how those relationships have changed you, that helps you look forward to what you're looking for. I'm super emotional. I'm very relational. I'm super empathetic. My husband can be very disconnected. He's very pragmatic. If I'm broken, if a friend hurts my feelings, I'll move on. He's and yet at the same time, over time, I have softened him, and he has allowed me to set healthier boundaries. And so I think when you look at past relationships, it helps you to, what have I learned? What did I not learn? What was good? What was bad? And taking full inventory of what that other person brought out in you. Did they bring out a darkness in you? Did they bring out the best in you? Because then that helps you to kind of think about, and to be able to perceive what you're looking for in the next relationship.
As I hear you talk, I'm like, we have to do this again. There's so much more to it. And I again, just thank you for being so transparent. And when I started the podcast, some of the key words were honesty, transparency, being authentic. You checked all those boxes today, and just to be able to share with others, because I do think it is. Like I told you, when the woman says just me and Jesus, I said, no, I'm looking behind. I think you want what's behind your eyes. I can see something else that you want. We do desire it. It's not I don't think we should be afraid to say that, yes, I want to, I want to be connected back with a person. That's not saying that we are weak in any way. That's just who we are. God made us. Our desire is kind of how we are made. I don't know about you, but I'm better when I'm with someone that I'm just a better Darrin person by himself is just, yeah, he's kind of bland. But I'm so much better, and I want other people to be able to experience that. And that doesn't mean everything will always be bliss, or everything will always be happy. But there's some things that we can do, with the help of God, of course, to be able to have these beautiful relationships. Heather, thank you. Thank you for this time. You want to say anything else before we go?
I know. I just want to say thank you as well. I really, and I always enjoy our conversations, and I appreciate the opportunity to share. I just been praying that whoever is listening would glean something. I hope that it would bless somebody to start conversation, because, like you said, we all go through these things and no one talks about them. And I think that when we bring things into the light, the Lord can really move and heal us. And so it's just my sincere prayer that this is a blessing. So thank you for letting me share.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for being on with me today.
Have a good day.
Bye bye, Boogie.